I thought I had it all: success, a husband I trusted, a life in Miami I'd worked for. But a 2 a.m. call shattered everything. $25,000 for Mark's legal emergency. I quickly discovered it was for his mistress, Laura Vasquez, a rival trying to steal not just him, but my career. Humiliated but determined, I turned the situation around, uncovering Mark's $500,000 embezzlement and his cover-up of a client escrow disaster. In the end, one call to the Miami PD revealed the truth, and my act of loyalty became the ultimate weapon, giving me total, uncompromising justice. This house, this enormous, silent house in Miami's Venetian Islands. It was supposed to be the monument to our success. My success, really. I furnished it, I designed it, I paid for the majority of it. Mark called it an investment. I called it a gilded cage. For 5 years, I lived the magazine spread life. Sarah, the hyper-successful real estate agent. Mark, the sharp corporate lawyer. We were a photograph, perfectly dressed, perfectly smiling, perfectly empty. The kind of emptiness that creeps in during the long hours when the ocean air feels too thick to breathe and the silence is so loud it rings in your ears. I remember the night the quiet finally shattered. It was 2 a.m. The kind of deep, black night where all your worst fears live. The moon was a sliver over the water, and the ringtone, Mark's custom, obnoxious CEO ringtone, ripped through the stillness like a siren. I was instantly awake, adrenaline flooding my system. Mark was on a crucial business trip to New York. The clock on the nightstand confirmed my dread. 2:03 a.m. I fumbled for the phone, my heart slamming against my ribs. Mark? Is everything okay? His voice was a low, gravelly monotone, clipped and urgent. No hello. No I love you or I'm sorry to wake you. Just a demand. Sarah. Listen to me. I need $25,000 wired immediately. The figure felt like a physical slap. 25,000. Mark, what are you talking about? It's the middle of the night. It's a client situation, Sarah. A legal emergency. Confidentiality agreement. If I don't get the money to this holding account by 6 a.m., the entire deal implodes. We lose millions. He used the word we. A word he hadn't meant in years. I could hear the forced strain in his voice, the thinly veiled panic. This wasn't a legal emergency. This was fear. This is the moment, right now, where you feel the knot in your stomach tighten. You know the lie is coming, but you can't look away. I'm asking you to do one thing. If you've ever felt this gut-wrenching suspense, if you've ever been pulled into a story like this, don't just watch. Hit subscribe. Seriously. It keeps me going. If you won't, I want you to go to the comments and tell me exactly why you won't. I'm waiting. My mind raced, but my heart was eerily still. A strange calm settled over me. Mark's lies were always complicated, layered with professional jargon to make them untouchable. But the truth was always simple. Mark put himself first. Always. This wasn't about a client. I knew it in my bones. I had been paying attention. The late working dinners that smelled faintly of expensive perfume. The sudden, inexplicable trip to New York when his calendar was light. The way his eyes refused to meet mine when he spoke about their future. Our future. Mark, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Is this about the legal emergency, or is it about her? Silence. The silence stretched across the entire country, a tangible, suffocating weight. It was the longest silence of my life. And in that silence, I had my answer. Finally, he spoke. Not with guilt. Not with apology. But with cold, impatient irritation. Don't be ridiculous, Sarah. Just transfer the funds. Account number is being sent to your secured email now. He hung up. No, I love you. No, I'll explain later. Just the dial tone. That's when the heartbroken calm snapped. I didn't cry. Tears were wasted energy. I walked to my home office, the marble floor cold under my feet. I opened my banking portal. The account held more money than he could ever imagine. My money. Money I had earned, closed deals for. And built from nothing. The email popped up. The account name was generic, a holding company in Delaware. But Mark's desperation was real. The money was for her. His mistress. Probably some catastrophic demand she had made to keep his secret, or perhaps to fund their grand escape. As my finger hovered over the confirm transfer button, I saw everything with perfect, freezing clarity. This wasn't a transaction. This was a gift. A gift I was giving to Mark, a temporary reprieve. But I wasn't buying his freedom. I was buying his leash. I hit the button. $25,000 vanished from my account. I leaned back in the leather chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the cold resolution in my eyes. I was no longer Sarah, the heartbroken wife. I was Sarah, the architect. I will transfer the money. But he will never see that money again. Not a dime. And I will take everything else. I picked up my phone again. Not to call Mark. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped on a name that I hadn't used in 10 years. My former associate, a financial forensics specialist named Elijah. It was time to build a strategy. The game had changed. Mark had just made his final, most expensive mistake. And I hadn't even started playing yet. Who was this woman? And what had Mark truly gotten himself into? That $25,000 was his only way out. The sun hadn't even begun to smear the horizon when Elijah answered. He was in London dealing with what he called institutional negligence. But he always had time for me. We went back to my very first complex real estate deal. He dug me out of a fraud nightmare that made Mark's current situation look like a parking ticket. Sarah, his voice was still heavy with sleep. It must be catastrophic for you to call at this hour. You sound calm. I am beyond catastrophic, Elijah. I'm surgical. I need you to look at a transaction. $25,000 wired at 2:15 a.m. into a Delaware holding company. I need to know who the real beneficial owner is. I need every linked account, every known relative, every past transaction. And I need it yesterday. I gave him the holding account number. He didn't ask why. He knew me. He knew Mark. He knew the veneer of our life was built on my backbone and his ego. Consider it done, he said. But Sarah, what is the goal here? Retaliation? Or extraction? The goal, I said, looking out at the waking Miami skyline, is justice. But justice, Elijah, is expensive. And I intend to make him pay the full market rate. While Elijah began his work, I started mine. My first move was to make Mark's $25,000 transfer completely untraceable back to our shared marital accounts. In the event he ever had the presence of mind to review the records, I wasn't just moving money. I was building a firewall. I transferred a large, random amount, $87,450 from my personal, non-marital trust into a high-yield savings account we rarely used. I then moved the $25,000 from the savings account to the Mark-related transaction account, and then covered the gap with an automated transfer back from the trust. On paper, it looked like a standard shuffling of assets for tax optimization, hidden amongst dozens of similar, complex transactions I initiated daily. He was a lawyer, but he was financially lazy. He would never see the three-step shell game. The $25,000 was now financially invisible to him, buried under 2 layers of my own complexity. He thought he was dealing with a wife. He was dealing with a woman who specialized in closing multi-million-dollar deals and hiding contingency funds. He'd forgotten who I was. And that was his biggest mistake. Around noon, Mark finally called back. Not to thank me, not to apologize, but to confirm. Did you handle that transfer, Sarah? His voice was sharp, back to the professional lawyer persona. Yes, Mark. It's done. Good. Look, I can't discuss the particulars, but this was a major cleanup. You saved us serious exposure. I'll be back on Friday. Don't worry about it. I'm not worried about it, Mark, I replied. My voice perfectly neutral, devoid of any warmth or accusation. Just curious. A legal settlement of that size, wired internationally at 2 a.m., surely the funds will be repaid to the marital account promptly. His irritation was immediate and audible. Sarah, you know the constraints of high-level corporate law. It will be accounted for, yes, eventually. But you need to trust me here. Stop digging. Of course, I said softly. I always trust you, Mark. And that was the moment he lost. He dismissed the transaction. He dismissed my intelligence. And he dismissed the potential for consequences. He confirmed that the $25,000 was a disposable asset, easily hidden, easily forgotten. And I had his permission to keep digging. That evening, as I stared blankly at a spreadsheet showing the projected returns on a condo development, my phone buzzed. It was Elijah. I have the preliminary, Sarah. It's exactly what you thought. It wasn't a corporate settlement. It was a person. The mistress, I stated flatly. Maybe. The beneficial owner of the Delaware holding company is a woman named Lara Vasquez. Mid-30s. Miami resident. And here's where it gets interesting. The holding company's primary activity isn't just generic asset management. Elijah, just tell me. She's a real estate consultant, Sarah. Specifically, she specializes in closing commercial land deals near the Miami port. The one you and Mark have been arguing about for months. The one he insisted was a bad investment and pulled our capital from last year. The blood drained from my face. This wasn't some casual fling. This wasn't just physical betrayal. This was a financial assassination attempt. Lara Vasquez was not Mark's mistake. She was Mark's partner. Mark hadn't just paid off a woman, he had funded the competition, and the real price for his silence was about to be revealed. Lara Vasquez. I knew the name. A shark. She tried to undercut me on the Bayside Tower deal 3 years ago. She was fierce, ruthless, and exactly the kind of woman Mark would despise unless she was working for him. This wasn't just cheating. Cheating is sloppy, emotional. This was a deliberate, multi-layered attack on my entire life orchestrated by the man who shared my bed. He hadn't pulled our joint capital from that Portland deal because it was bad. He pulled it so she could buy in cheap. He used my money, my expertise, and my distraction to pave the way for his mistress to become my direct, professional competitor. And then, when she inevitably turned on him, demanding more cash to keep their scheme quiet, he came to me the very person he was stealing from to cover the blackmail. The betrayal was no longer emotional, it was capital offense. He wasn't just ruining our marriage, he was trying to ruin my legacy. I spent the next 24 hours in the office, but not the one I paid for. I was in Mark's private study, the room he guarded like a vault. He was meticulous but predictable. I went straight for his secure file cabinet, the one locked with the combination of our anniversary year. The irony wasn't lost on me. Inside, I found the file on the Port 95 development. It was slim, dismissed, filed away. But the internal memos told a different story. Mark's notes: potential high yield must leverage internal info to reduce cost basis. Confidentiality paramount. And the dates. He had been meeting with a confidential asset Lara months before the $25,000 demand. They weren't just sleeping together, they were conspiring. He was leaking confidential information from my firm's internal projections to his mistress so she could buy the land cheap, then sell it high. The $25,000 wasn't a ransom, it was a hush payment, a desperate attempt to keep the operation from imploding. I photocopied everything. Every memo, every calendar entry, every suspicious email chain where Mark used a burner account to communicate with L.V. Holdings. I was building a case file that didn't just end a marriage but ended a career. Mark had made his first strategic move, stealing from me. My first countermove wouldn't involve lawyers or accusations. It would be silent. Devastating. I called 3 of my most influential contacts: the lead counsel for the State Regulatory Commission, the president of the Miami Bar Association, and the managing partner of Mark's firm, Mr. Hayes. I didn't accuse Mark of anything specific. I used the language of concern. Mr. Hayes, I said, my voice dripping with controlled worry, I'm concerned about Mark's recent stress. He's been incredibly erratic. There was a very late-night wire transfer, something highly irregular and completely uncharacteristic. I worry he might be suffering from professional burnout or worse, poor judgment due to personal duress. I'm only telling you this because I worry about the firm's reputation. I had planted the seed of doubt. Not about cheating but about competence and ethics. In the legal world, competence is everything. The firm would quietly begin to audit his pending cases. They would watch him. And they would find the paper trail I had just created. Mark was about to discover the difference between a high-stakes divorce and a hostile corporate takeover. As I organized the documents, one transaction note caught my eye. It was small, a single-line entry from 8 months ago, buried deep within Mark's personal ledger. It was a transfer from one of Mark's personal brokerage accounts to Lara Vasquez's company, not $25,000. It was $50,000. I froze. The $25,000 Mark demanded from me at 2 a.m. was not the initial payoff. It was the second, desperate installment. He had already given her double that amount months ago, trying to buy her silence and cooperation, before I even knew she existed. The truth hit me like a physical blow. Mark hadn't just betrayed me. He had been systematically draining our joint resources to fund a scheme that would eventually destroy my career. He was trapped, leveraged, and using my generosity to dig himself deeper. He needed $25,000 from me, because he had already spent $50,000 of his own. The price of his freedom was rising exponentially. And it was all coming due. But if the mistress had already bled him for $50,000, why was she now settling for only $25,000? What was the real leverage she held over him that neither of them had told me about? $50,000. That was the real number. The $25,000 I transferred was merely a temporary bandage on a hemorrhage that had been bleeding our life dry for months. Mark hadn't just strayed. He had built a second life, a second career, on a foundation of theft and contempt. I sat there, the weight of that $50,000 secret pressing down on my chest until it was hard to draw breath. It wasn't the money that hurt. I could earn that back in a single closing. It was the sheer, meticulous effort he had put into the deceit. The late nights, the feigned exhaustion, the calculated disinterest in my career. It was all a mask. I wasn't just married to a liar. I was married to an opponent. And I looked back on the last year and saw every single moment through this new, toxic lens. The time I was sick and he stayed late at the office to work on a brief he was likely coordinating strategy with Lara. The time he criticized my investment portfolio, he was clearing the path for her. The humiliation was a physical burn. I hadn't been a wife. I had been a funding source and a convenient distraction. The woman who kept the lights on while he played high-stakes games with a mistress who was also a rival. I left the study, the evidence stacked and sealed, and walked through the house. The grand staircase, the infinity pool, the custom kitchen, all trophies of a life I thought we had built together. Now, they were just props on an elaborate stage. I remembered choosing the granite for the countertops, arguing with the architect over the pitch of the roof, planning every piece of art that hung on these perfect, white walls. I did it for us. He watched the games on TV. I walked into our bedroom. His side of the closet was immaculate, still containing the suits he left behind for his trip. Suits I had bought for him, for his career, for the life he was busy tearing down. I didn't touch anything. I simply stood there, feeling the chilling vacuum of the space. This house wasn't a home. It was an investment. And investments that no longer served their purpose must be liquidated. The worst realization was that I hadn't lost love. I had lost the illusion of safety. And the only way to recover was to turn that pain into the sharpest weapon I possessed, my business acumen. Before Mark returned, I needed an exit plan that was watertight. A divorce based on infidelity is messy. A financial separation based on fraudulent business dealings is decisive. I called my financial advisor. Not my divorce lawyer. I didn't want the lawyers involved yet. Andrew, I need to open a trust account, completely separate from any joint asset declaration. Call it the contingency fund, I instructed. I want it structured to receive a large lump sum. The source will be the immediate confidential sale of the Aspen condo. The Aspen condo. It was a property Mark adored, thinking it was safely tied up in a long-term rental agreement that couldn't be touched for 3 years. He was wrong. I owned the operating company that managed the rentals. Start the process immediately, Andrew. Cash sale. Expedited closing. I want the funds in that trust, liquid and non-marital, before Mark steps back on Miami soil. Do not use standard channels. Use the offshore route we discussed last year. I need this to be invisible. I was selling the most beloved joint asset without his knowledge to fund the war against him. I wasn't waiting for the divorce settlement. I was securing my financial independence before I even told him I knew. The emotional fallout was complete. Now came the strategic extraction. He flew back late the next afternoon. Mark strolled through the front door, briefcase in hand, a practiced look of exhaustion on his face, the hero returning from the battlefield. "Sarah," he said, giving me a quick, dry kiss on the forehead. "Glad to be home. New York was hell. You handled that transfer, right?" "Saved my ass." "I did, Mark," I replied, meeting his eyes with a blank, placid stare. I was standing in the kitchen, casually slicing a lemon for a glass of water. My hands were steady, my smile was faint. The picture of the supportive, oblivious wife. "Good. Don't worry about it. It's handled." He dropped his briefcase with a thump. "I'm going to shower. Get a drink ready for me. Of course, I said, turning back to the marble counter. I heard him walk up the stairs. He didn't know I knew about Lara. He didn't know about the $50,000. He didn't know the Aspen condo was already off market. He thought he was home free. I picked up the lemon slice and tossed it into the crystal glass. The cold resolve settled over me. He wants a drink, I whispered to myself, looking at my reflection in the dark glass. I'll give him a drink. I'll pour him a tall, cold glass of reality. But what would happen when Mark checked his professional calendar and realized that the managing partner was suddenly requesting an informal review of his biggest client accounts? The next few days were a masterclass in domestic theater. Mark played the weary, overworked husband. I played the supportive, uncomplaining wife. But underneath the surface, the poison I had injected into his professional life was beginning to work. He was jumpy. His phone, usually handled with casual arrogance, was now guarded like a national secret. He spent hours in his study, doors locked, his voice low and irritable. One evening, I watched him from the kitchen as he took a call on the terrace. He kept pacing, running a hand through his hair, a clear sign of severe stress. I heard a few clipped phrases. Hayes is being ridiculous, just a routine audit. And then, the most telling one, it's not related to the New York transfer. Absolutely not. He was scrambling. The fear of professional exposure was far more acute than the fear of marital infidelity. Mark could rationalize cheating. He couldn't rationalize losing his standing at the firm. My subtle warnings to Mr. Hayes had landed perfectly, creating a professional paranoia that would drive him to distraction. He was spending all his energy trying to manage the external threat, the firm, which meant he wasn't looking inward, at the home, where the real enemy was sitting, calmly pouring wine. Elijah's full financial forensics report arrived late that night. It wasn't just about Lara Vasquez. It was about Mark's entire hidden financial profile. Sarah, Elijah typed in the secure chat. Mark has been operating with significant, high-interest debt for almost 2 years. He's leveraging his partnership shares and taking out personal loans, all channeled through 3 offshore subsidiaries. The shock wasn't that he was in debt, it was why. Mark, the hyper-cautious corporate attorney, was taking insane risks. Why, Elijah? What is he funding that requires this level of concealment and leverage? It appears to be land acquisition, Sarah. Very specific parcels. The Port 95 development, yes, but also a cluster of adjacent properties that are currently zoned residential but projected to be rezoned commercial within 18 months. He wasn't just helping Lara. He was trying to corner the entire market. He made an enormous, highly leveraged bet. Mark hadn't just paid Lara to conspire. He had used her company to secure the initial deals, paying her exorbitant consulting fees, the $50,000, and the demanded $25,000 to keep her quiet and keep the properties held in her name until he could finalize his own funding. He wasn't the mastermind, he was the desperate gambler. The report also pointed to a $500,000 hole in our joint investment portfolio. $500,000 missing entirely, classified cryptically as high-risk private equity placement. I knew instantly where to look. Mark had a hidden safe deposit box at a small downtown bank he used years ago for his first student loan. He thought I'd forgotten about it. That afternoon, using an old key I had kept just in case my foresight was starting to feel less like paranoia and more like intuition, I gained access to the box. It wasn't full of cash or gold. It contained one thing: a statement for an unsecured personal line of credit, the same $500,000 channeled directly into an account in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary? The same subsidiary Elijah had flagged. This wasn't petty theft. This was grand larceny of the marital estate. He wasn't just cheating, he was systematically looting my future to feed his own obsession with becoming a property mogul overnight. The $25,000 demand was a pathetic afterthought compared to the $500,000 he had already stolen and risked on a fraudulent gamble with his mistress. My pain evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing purpose. He didn't just break the marriage contract, he broke the law. And I had the paper trail that proved it. It was time to escalate. The divorce wasn't going to be about who got the house. It was going to be about who went to jail. I used the access Elijah had provided to Mark's burner email account. I composed a short, anonymous email, perfectly timed to hit Mark's inbox just as he was settling in for his nightly stress drink. The email contained a single, chilling attachment: a high-resolution photocopy of the $50,000 transaction receipt to Laura Vasquez's company, dated 8 months ago. The body of the email was simple. This is just the beginning. Clean your desk. I didn't send it from me or Elijah, or even Laura. I routed it through one of the complex, anonymous networks Elijah set up, making it look like it came from an anonymous internal source at Mark's firm, perhaps a disgruntled junior partner who saw the audits coming. I heard the ding of his phone from the study downstairs. Then, silence, followed by the sound of glass hitting the hardwood floor. Mark now knew someone internal was hunting him. He would panic. But who did he think sent the email? The firm? Laura? Or the one person he thought he had completely fooled, the woman standing outside his locked door? The sound of the glass shattering downstairs was the most satisfying music I had heard in months. Mark didn't come upstairs. He stayed in his study, pacing like a caged animal. I didn't need to see his face to know the email had landed perfectly. He knew. Someone knew about the $50,000 to Laura. His first frantic move was predictable: damage control. I heard him dialing his phone repeatedly, speaking in hushed, furious tones. He was calling his internal contacts, trying to trace the sender, trying to shut down the routine audit that was suddenly much, much more dangerous. It's corporate espionage. I heard him hiss into the phone. Someone has old fabricated documents. I need to know who is circulating this garbage. He never once considered the document wasn't fabricated. He never considered I had sent it. He was blinded by arrogance, thinking the threat had to be outside his marriage, a rival lawyer, a disgruntled junior. And that was my greatest advantage. He was focused entirely on the firm. I was focused on everything else: his reputation, his assets, and his mistress. 3 days later, I sat in my home office, signing the final digital closing documents. The Aspen condo, our mountain retreat that Mark considered his private sanctuary, was officially sold. Cash transaction, no questions asked. The funds, a staggering amount that far exceeded the $25,000 Mark had demanded, were now safely sitting in the offshore contingency fund, entirely beyond the reach of any divorce proceedings or joint asset claims. It felt like I had just defused a bomb and walked away with the payload. When Mark finally realized the condo was gone, the asset declaration for the divorce would already be filed. It would be too late. He would find out his sanctuary had funded his downfall. This wasn't revenge by shouting or crying. This was revenge by financial separation. I was surgically removing every joint thread that tied my future to his decay. Small victory, yes, but every brick I took from his wall was a step toward his complete collapse. My next move was professional. Mark needed his network. I needed him to be an isolated hazard. I began making the rounds at the Miami social functions we had previously attended together alone. When people asked about Mark, I didn't criticize him. I used the language of pity and concern. "Oh, Mark is just so stressed," I would tell the wives of his senior partners. "He's working around the clock. He seems so unstable. Honestly, I'm worried about his judgment. I just hope he hasn't made any rash decisions lately that could affect his standing at the firm." I wasn't gossiping about the cheating. I was raising a clinical question about his mental fitness and professional risk tolerance. Within a week, Mark was being excluded from high-level, after-hours planning sessions. His golf invitations dried up. His calls were returned slower. His partners weren't just auditing his files, they were isolating him. They saw him not as a successful colleague, but as a liability, a stressed-out man on the verge of making a spectacular, costly mistake. He was losing his power base, one polite, concerned conversation at a time, and he had no idea why. Mark, desperate and cornered by the mounting professional pressure, finally cracked. He needed his co-conspirator. He needed Laura. I watched him from the hallway. He locked himself in the study, phone pressed to his ear, attempting to call her. He tried her main line, her burner, her office. No answer. He began texting furiously. I knew, thanks to Elijah's sophisticated monitoring, that Mark's texts to Laura were routed through an obscure, encrypted messaging service he thought was untraceable. But I had the keys. As Mark sent his frantic text, "LV, call me now. They know about the $50K, this is a disaster." I was simultaneously sitting in my office, accessing the server logs. I didn't block the message, I simply delayed it. I set a timer. The message would sit in a digital limbo for exactly 12 hours, long enough for Mark to descend into a well of absolute panic, believing his co-conspirator had abandoned him entirely. I then opened a new message window, using the access I had to Lara's burner account, composing a short, clinical reply to his previous message about the $25,000. Your problem, Mark. Funds received. The arrangement is closed on my end. Do not contact me again. I sent the decoy message instantly. The phone in Mark's study dinged. He would read Lara's cold dismissal, confirming his fears of abandonment, while his desperate SOS sat in my digital waiting room. He now thought Lara was selling him out. He thought everyone was his enemy. And he was about to make a mistake far more consequential than stealing $500,000. What would happen when Mark's escalating paranoia drove him to betray the one person he thought he could trust, the person who held the only key to his survival? The atmosphere in the house became toxic. Mark was shattered. Lara's cold, automated reply, your problem, Mark. Funds received. The arrangement is closed on my end. Do not contact me again. Had convinced him she was cutting him loose, leaving him exposed to the anonymous internal investigation he believed was closing in. He was frantic, cycling between calling his lawyer a partner at a rival firm, another highly irregular move, and staring silently at the delayed message, still waiting to be delivered, the one that held the key to his panic. He was a cornered animal, desperate to find an outlet, an escape route. He even tried talking to me. Sarah, he said one morning, his voice thin, I know things have been difficult. This firm audit. It's brutal. I need your support. We're a partnership. Of course we are, Mark, I replied, my eyes wide and sincere. Just tell me what's wrong. You know I'm discreet. I can help. Is it financial? He flinched. The question was too close. No, Sarah. It's confidential client privilege. I can't. Just trust me. The irony almost made me laugh. He was begging for my help, but couldn't bring himself to stop lying. He was so conditioned to deception that the truth had become physically impossible for him, and that confirmation that he would rather lose everything than tell me the truth was all I needed to finalize my execution plan. Elijah was finishing his final deep dive into Lara Vasquez. He wasn't just checking her real estate holdings, he was checking her history. Her family, her education, her very first job. He called me directly, his voice grave. Sarah, I have it. And this isn't good. This changes everything. The $50,000 wasn't just a fee for services. It was a payoff, a settlement, but not for the affair. It was for a fatal conflict of interest that Mark created years ago. What conflict, Elijah? The land deal? No, bigger. Lara Vasquez's father was a man named Arthur Vasquez. He was a small business owner who sued a major corporate client of Mark's firm, one of Mark's most important clients, in fact about 10 years ago. It was a high-profile case. Mark was part of the defense team that crushed the Vasquez family business. The name clicked into place. I remembered the case. It was brutal, a textbook example of corporate law burying the small guy. The Vasquez family was financially ruined. Lara isn't just a rival, Sarah. She's the daughter. She's a vengeful survivor. Lara Vasquez didn't care about Mark's heart. She cared about his destruction. She had infiltrated his life not as a mistress but as a meticulously planned, long-term legal adversary. She seduced him, learned about his weaknesses, and lured him into the land scheme using stolen projections from my firm likely passed to her by Mark himself. And the $50,000 payoff? That wasn't a hush payment for cheating. It was to settle an internal ethical violation or, worse, a discovery violation related to her father's decade-old case, a hidden piece of evidence Mark's team must have suppressed. Lara was forcing Mark to pay her to keep the evidence of his own, or his firm's, past legal malpractice quiet. Mark was not cheating with a mistress. He was sleeping with his firm's potential litigant, and he was using our shared wealth to cover up a catastrophic conflict of interest that could disbar him and dissolve his entire firm. The $25,000 I sent was the emergency fund for Mark's legal malpractice cover-up. The $500,000 he stole was to fund the property scheme that would make them both rich and destroy my career simultaneously. I hadn't just been betrayed by my husband. I had been married to a ticking legal time bomb. Lara wasn't demanding $25,000 for sex. She was demanding it for silence regarding potential disbarment charges and a massive civil suit that could bankrupt Mark and the firm he worked for. I picked up the evidence I had collected, the wire transfers, the offshore account details, the memos regarding the Port 95 deal, and the new information on Lara Vasquez's family history. Mark was not worth saving. He had not only endangered our marriage, but he had leveraged my entire professional security against a long-game revenge plot by an adversary he himself created. I called Mr. Hayes, Mark's senior partner, again. This time, my tone wasn't one of concern. It was one of controlled menace. "Mr. Hayes," I said, my voice smooth and low. "I need an immediate, private meeting. This isn't about professional burnout. This is about a critical breach of client confidentiality and severe ethical malpractice involving the Vasquez case from 2015. I have the documented proof of the payoff, the offshore accounts, and the highly leveraged debt Mark incurred to hide it. The firm has two options. You deal with Mark now, or the Miami Bar Association deals with Mark and the firm's liability in the morning. And I suggest you move fast. Because his mistress is not going to wait." I hung up. I had delivered the death blow to his career. But what would Mark do when he realized the firm wasn't just auditing him, they were suddenly freezing his assets, changing the locks, and launching a full-scale internal investigation based on my evidence? I didn't have to wait long for the fallout from the call to Mr. Hayes. The legal world moves with brutal efficiency when internal liability is at stake. Within the hour, Mark's phone, which had been buzzing with his desperate attempts to contact Lara and his rival lawyer, went silent. Totally silent. He went to his study door, tried to unlock it, and found the key wouldn't turn. The firm had remotely deactivated his security codes and digital keys. His professional life had just been locked away from him. A discreet courier arrived, not at the front door, but at the service entrance, delivering a heavy envelope. Mark stumbled into the kitchen, his face pale, the arrogance stripped away, leaving only raw fear. He didn't open it immediately. He knew what it was. Suspension notice. Immediate administrative leave. All access revoked. The firm wasn't waiting for the Bar Association. They were mitigating their risk. I had successfully turned my husband into a toxic asset. "Sarah," he stammered, holding the envelope like a bomb. "What did you do?" They think I'm involved in malpractice. The audit wasn't routine." "Who did this?" I looked at him, my expression perfectly blank. "Mark, you've been working yourself into the ground for months. You told me yourself you were stressed. I hope you haven't made any mistakes." "I really do." His eyes narrowed, searching my face. He still didn't see me. He saw a convenient scapegoat. While Mark was distracted by the demise of his career, I was finalizing the divorce papers with my lawyer, whom I had quietly retained weeks ago. We weren't filing for irreconcilable differences or adultery. We were filing for financial fraud, conversion of marital assets, and breach of fiduciary duty. My lawyer's response to the new evidence was one word: devastating. My demands weren't greedy, they were surgical. Immediate relinquishing of all interest in the marital home. The house was mine, and the $500,000 Mark stole would be deducted from his share of the equity. Full reimbursement of the $75,000, the $50,000, and the $25,000 wired to Lara Vasquez. This established the transactions as illicit payoffs, not marital expenses. Forfeiture of his entire retirement and partnership equity to offset the damages caused by the illegal $500,000 leverage scheme. "He will fight this, Sarah," my lawyer warned. "Let him fight, Richard," I said, my voice ice cold. "Every document he files, every defense he mounts, confirms his guilt in the financial fraud. He can fight the divorce, or he can fight the Bar Association and the SEC. But he can't fight both without incriminating himself further. He can have solvency, or he can have a defense. Not both." The final phase of my strategy was to ensure no escape. I accessed the home security system. I didn't turn it off. I created a hidden backup log that mirrored every door opening, every call duration, and every time Mark tried to access his now locked study. I also, using the credentials Elijah provided, accessed Mark's cloud backup. I downloaded every file, every draft, every client memo, every email about Lara that he thought he had deleted. Nothing is ever truly gone on the internet. He was now living in a completely transparent cage. I had proof of his actions, proof of his professional sabotage, and proof of his attempts to cover it up, all secured in 3 separate off-site locations. He thought he was being hunted by his firm. He thought Lara was the snake. He had no idea the house itself was the trap, and I was holding the key. This wasn't just revenge. It was an investment into my future security. I was cleaning house, legally and digitally. I stood on the terrace that night, 2 hours into the demise of my marriage. The lights of Miami glittered across the water. The silence in the house was heavy. But now it was a silence of anticipation, not emptiness. I had been betrayed, humiliated, and financially endangered. But I had responded not with tears, but with precision. I had gone from being the supportive wife to the predator. The cost of this victory was heavy. I lost the man I thought I married, and I became a person capable of ruthless, cold calculation. Was the peace I gained worth the peace of my soul I lost? I don't know. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Mark was sitting alone in the dark, clutching his suspension notice. He thought the worst was over. He thought the professional collapse was the full extent of my plan. He was wrong. He had yet to receive the full, horrifying truth about the man he had betrayed, the real connection to the police report that would be the final, catastrophic revelation. The question was, what was the ultimate, devastating consequence of the $500,000 Mark had stolen? And how would the police, not the lawyers, finally deliver his karma? Mark's suspension wasn't the end of the firm's action. It was just the beginning of their risk mitigation. They couldn't afford a lengthy, embarrassing internal investigation that exposed their potential liability in the Vasquez case. They had to cut him out, quickly and publicly. The next morning, an internal email went out to every partner, every associate, and every key client. It didn't mention malpractice or Vasquez. It used sterile, professional language that was, in its own way, far more damning. The subject line was, "Immediate termination of partnership, Mark D. Hamilton." The body stated that due to gross, undisclosed conflicts of interest and severe mismanagement of high-value client funds, Mark was terminated for cause. The word mismanagement was the kill shot. It wasn't about him cheating. It was about his competence. His reputation was instantly poisoned. I watched him read it in the kitchen. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, the ghost of his own destroyed legacy. This was the end of Mark Hamilton, corporate lawyer. But in his final collapse, he proved he still had one last, desperate trick up his sleeve. I had focused all my attention on the large, immovable assets, the house, the firm equity, the Aspen condo. I had been so confident in my financial fortress. Then a text from Andrew, my financial advisor, arrived. It was urgent, all caps. "Sarah. Call me now. Mark is moving. We have a problem with the Venetian Trust. My contingency fund, the fund created from the Aspen condo sale, was structured to be impenetrable. But Mark, through sheer desperation, and leveraging a deeply obscure clause in our prenuptial agreement regarding unilateral investment liquidation, had managed to place a temporary restraining order on a significant portion of the funds. It was an ingenious, ruthless move. He claimed that because the Aspen condo was intended to be marital property, and I liquidated it during a time of undue marital duress, he had the right to freeze the funds until a court could determine the intent of the sale. He wasn't fighting the fraud charge. He was fighting my liquidity. He knew I needed cash to fund the full forensic audit and the specialized legal team required to prosecute the fraud. He wasn't trying to win the money back. He was trying to starve me out. I was hit by the sudden, terrifying realization. I had been so focused on the big kill I had exposed my flank. My strategic advantage was suddenly locked down. I scrambled to call Richard, my divorce lawyer, demanding immediate action. "He can't do this. The money is gone, it's sold. He can tie it up, Sarah," Richard countered, sounding grave. "It's a stalling tactic. He wants to drag this out. Litigation is expensive. If you don't have liquid capital, you can't fight him effectively. We have to file an immediate motion to dissolve the order, but that will take weeks. Weeks that would cost me tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees, while Mark's career was already over and his debt was mounting. He was willing to burn down the entire marital estate just to hurt me." I hung up, my hands shaking. I felt the surge of hot, pure rage. The arrogant fool. He was destroying himself, but he wouldn't go down without trying to drag me into the financial abyss with him. I sat there, looking at the house. The golden cage now felt like a very expensive anchor. My revenge had just become infinitely more complicated and costly. But as I reviewed the legal filing Mark's cheap new lawyer had submitted, a subtle detail caught my eye. The language used in the motion wasn't Mark's, it wasn't his lawyer's. It was too intricate, too specific, citing case law Mark himself had dismissed years ago as overly aggressive. This move was too intelligent for desperate, suspended Mark. He had to be coached. Someone had given him the legal playbook. Someone who knew the intimate details of my financial planning and my trust structures. Someone who hated me as much as, or possibly more than, Mark did. I called Elijah, the forensic specialist, immediately. Elijah, I need you to trace Mark's activities immediately prior to the restraining order filing. Who was he talking to? Who was he consulting that wasn't his current lawyer? His response was immediate. Just a moment. Yes, Mark made one highly unusual, encrypted call 8 hours ago. It was brief. And the number traces back to a prepaid burner phone registered in the name of Laura Vasquez's cousin, who is a financial litigation expert in Tampa. Laura hadn't abandoned Mark. She was controlling him. She hadn't finished her revenge against the man who destroyed her father. She was using Mark's desperation to attack me as well. I was a secondary target in Laura Vasquez's larger, family-fueled war of vengeance. The true enemy wasn't my ex-husband. It was the woman who had already stolen $75,000, and she was far more strategic and calculating than Mark could ever be. What devastating trap had Laura laid for me, using Mark as her puppet? And how would I escape it? Laura Vasquez. She wasn't just revenge-driven, she was a master chess player. She had convinced Mark, in his desperation, to execute the restraining order, knowing it would tie up my liquid assets. She wasn't after my money, she was after my time. She wanted to delay my ability to prosecute the financial fraud against Mark, buying time for her Port 95 land deal to close, making their stolen investment pay off. This wasn't just a divorce anymore, it was a high-stakes legal war, orchestrated by a highly skilled opponent who saw me as an obstacle to her family's vindication. The realization brought not panic, but a chilling clarity. I had to stop playing Mark's game of attrition and start playing Laura's game of speed. If she wanted a slow, financially debilitating court battle, I would give her a fast, public and career-ending spectacle. I called Richard, my lawyer, back. We're not waiting weeks for the restraining order hearing, Richard. We are filing the full, unredacted financial fraud claim against Mark tomorrow morning. Include every wire transfer, every offshore detail, and the direct link to the Vasquez family's prior litigation with his firm. We expose him entirely. Richard argued against the speed. Sarah, this is an incredibly aggressive move. Once the court sees the evidence of the Vasquez connection, they might escalate this to the state attorney general before we've secured your assets. Exactly, I said, cutting him off. That's the point. Mark's leverage over my contingency fund relies on the slow pace of divorce court. But if we turn this into a criminal investigation, the civil restraining order becomes moot. The state will freeze all his assets first, giving me the window to prove the money was stolen marital property. We force their hand. The next morning the documents were filed. It wasn't just a divorce petition. It was a 40-page dossier detailing years of systematic financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially, serious federal tax evasion tied to the offshore accounts. The details were graphic, indisputable, and devastatingly public. The news was a bomb dropping in the high-stakes Miami legal and real estate circles. The narrative was no longer Mark cheating on his wife. It was Mark, the disgraced corporate partner, being sued by his wife for criminal fraud. With Mark publicly exposed, I turned my attention to Laura. She was too smart to have left a direct link to the restraining order, but she had a public reputation in real estate to maintain. Elijah found the key. Laura was currently trying to close a massive multi-investor deal for the Port 95 land. If that deal failed, her financial leverage over Mark would vanish, and the $75,000 she stole would have been for nothing. I used my own extensive network. I didn't contact her buyers directly. I contacted the title insurance firm handling the Port 95 deal. I sent them a carefully worded, anonymous tip, a highly technical red flag concerning a potential undisclosed material legal liability tied to one of the holding companies involved in the transaction. I didn't name Mark or Laura. I simply pointed to the Vasquez family's prior history of litigation with Mark's firm. A title insurance firm's single greatest fear is undisclosed risk. They would immediately initiate a deep dive investigation into the Vasquez name and any related party, Laura. The Port 95 deal would instantly be delayed, perhaps permanently. Lara wanted to stall my liquidity. I was stalling her entire empire, tit for tat, but my stakes were higher. With the professional and financial traps set for both Mark and Lara, the only thing left was the emotional reckoning. I had filed the documents, but I hadn't delivered them. That was the last piece of the performance. I walked through the house, found Mark sitting in the living room, still stunned, watching his termination memo scroll on the news ticker on his laptop. He was a shadow of the arrogant man I married. I had the formal documents, the summons, the fraud petition, the details of the $500,000 theft in a heavy manila envelope. I placed the envelope on the coffee table in front of him. The silence was immense. "It's over, Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, entirely devoid of rage or sadness. "It's all over." He slowly looked up, his eyes hollowed out. "What is this, Sarah? More of your retribution?" "No," I replied, my voice stealing. "This is not retribution. This is the full market valuation of your choices. Read every page. It tells the story of your life, Mark. The truth." I turned and walked away, leaving him alone with the consequences. He was reading the final, devastating document of his life. But what he would read on the last page, the revelation about a forgotten, desperate lie he told months ago, was the one fact that connected the fraud, the cheating, and the police call that was still waiting to happen. I waited in the kitchen, the silence thick and heavy. I didn't need to hear him shouting. I knew what he was reading. He wasn't just reviewing legal jargon. He was reviewing the raw, undeniable evidence of his choices laid out in cold, criminal detail. The $500,000 theft. The offshore accounts. The detailed connection to Lara Vasquez's father and the malpractice cover-up. It was all there. Then the scream. Not a shout of rage, but a high-pitched sound of shock and utter disbelief. Mark burst into the kitchen, the thick manila folder still in his hand, pages spilling onto the marble floor. His face was distorted, his eyes wide and bloodshot. You filed this," he shrieked. "You went to the state. You detailed the funds? The Vasquez connection, Sarah? You gave them everything. You gave me the evidence, Mark," I said. My voice quiet but firm. "I just organized it. This is criminal. This is beyond divorce. They'll disbar me. They'll sue me into the Stone Age." "You did that to yourself," I said, finally stepping toward him. "When you stole from me. When you leveraged my security to pay your mistress and cover up your illegal bets." He tried to shift the blame, the desperate final act of a narcissist. "It was only $25,000. You have millions, Sarah. You're trying to ruin me over a minor mistake." "A minor mistake?" I advanced slowly, forcing him back. "The $25,000 was the insult, Mark. The $500,000 you risked on the Port 95 fraud was the crime. You didn't just jeopardize our assets, you betrayed the life I built for us. And you lied to my face, begging me for help, while you were being manipulated by the daughter of the man you professionally destroyed. Lara Vasquez didn't love you, Mark. She was playing the long game of revenge for her father, and you were too arrogant, too blind, and too cheap to see it." The force of the truth hit him. He recoiled, realizing the full, terrifying scope of his stupidity. He hadn't just been cheating. He had been the pawn in someone else's vendetta. She used me," he whispered, the realization finally breaking through the panic. "You let her use you," I corrected, my voice dropping to a harsh finality. "And when you came to me asking for money, you were leveraging my love to cover your legal crimes. That's unforgivable." He tried one last time to manipulate me. He dropped the arrogance and resorted to pathetic begging. "Sarah, please. We can stop this. We can settle. I'll sign everything. Just call your lawyer. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them the Vasquez documents were fabricated. If this goes public, I lose my license, my freedom." He took a step toward me, reaching out. "I still love you, Sarah. We can fix this. Just don't let them take everything. Please." I took a deliberate step back, denying him even the comfort of my proximity. "Don't lie to me, Mark," I said, my voice flat. "If you still loved me, you wouldn't have stolen $500,000 and put me in the path of a vengeful legal adversary. Your concern isn't for our marriage. It's for your comfortable life. And I have already decided. I am no longer funding your comfort." He collapsed against the counter, defeated. He had nothing left to use against me. The money was tied up, the career was gone, and the mistress was revealed as an enemy. You asked me what I did, I said, walking toward the grand front door. I paused with my hand on the polished brass handle. I filed the fraud petition. I spoke to your firm. I sold the Aspen condo. And there's one more thing. Mark looked up, his face a mask of dread. I changed the locks on the doors effective immediately, and I canceled the authorization on your credit cards, your health insurance, and your firm's car lease. You are no longer financially attached to me, or this house, in any way. You have 20 minutes to collect the personal items you can carry in a small bag. After that, the security service will escort you off the property. You can contact your lawyer for instructions on where to send the remainder of your belongings. I opened the door and stepped out, letting the warm Miami air rush in. I watched as the black SUV carrying the security team pulled silently up the drive. Mark was now completely homeless, stripped of his resources, and facing criminal charges. But as the clock ticked down to his forced eviction, what desperate, reckless thing would a ruined man do with his last moments in the golden cage? I stood on the curb, allowing the security team to handle the final ignominious moments. Mark, defeated, emerged with a small duffel bag. He looked like a refugee from his own life. But even in defeat, the venom remained. As he reached the security vehicle, he stopped, turned back to the house, and in a final, pathetic act of defiance, he hurled a rock through the enormous, custom-made hurricane window of his former study. The glass shattered with an echoing, sickening crash. He didn't hurt me, but he damaged the house, the only thing I had left of that gilded life. It was a petty, final outburst of a man who couldn't stand to lose control. The security team quickly contained him, but the damage was done. The sound was a harsh reminder that I was not yet free. I watched the security SUV pull away. Mark Hamilton was gone, but the mess he left behind, both structural and legal, was still very much mine to clean up. The emotional release of the confrontation was quickly followed by the crushing weight of the administrative reality. The immediate high of the eviction faded as the legal reality set in. Mark's lawyers, now funded by whatever meager personal accounts he had left, fought the fraud filing with an army of technicalities. The biggest hurdle remained the restraining order on my contingency fund. Mark's legal maneuver had been effective. The court, citing the complexity of the marital property laws, refused to dissolve the order immediately. My funds were locked, pending a full evidentiary hearing. I was cash poor. I was paying my legal team on credit, hemorrhaging money just to fight a stalling tactic. Mark was out, broke, and humiliated, but he was successfully executing Laura's plan. He was making my revenge too expensive. I sat in court hearings, listening to lawyers argue over procedural details, the real truth of the theft and betrayal buried under layers of legal jargon. I felt a surge of doubt. Had I been too aggressive? Should I have taken the quieter, cheaper path of simple divorce? The victory felt hollow when the bills piled up and my freedom remained restricted. Elijah called, his voice unusually somber. He had traced the flow of the stolen $500,000 from Mark's offshore account. He had found an unexpected recipient, one that didn't fit the pattern of Laura's land scheme. Sarah, I've tracked the final wire transfer from that $500,000 Mark stole. It wasn't all for Laura's development. Roughly $150,000 was moved to a completely different entity. Not a holding company. A person. Who? Elijah. Another mistress. Another co-conspirator. No. This is a legitimate person, Sarah. A retired elderly woman in Fort Lauderdale. The payment was disguised as a settlement disbursement. Her name is Clara Davies. Elijah continued, connecting the threads. Clara Davies is the primary caregiver for her grandson who suffers from a rare chronic illness. She sued a major insurance company 2 years ago, a company represented by Mark's former firm. She was trying to secure a massive final settlement for the boy's lifetime care. They fought her and crushed her case. My blood ran cold. The firm had won that case, leaving the family destitute. Mark made the payment, Elijah stated. He channeled $150,000 to her directly. 6 months ago. It wasn't a payoff, Sarah. It was a highly illegal, unilateral, and probably guilt-driven payment from the stolen funds. He didn't tell the firm and he didn't tell Laura. $150,000. Stolen money, yes, but money that went to save a sick child. Mark, the ruthless corporate shark who betrayed me and stole $500,000, had used a significant chunk of it to commit an act of illegal, hidden charity. He wasn't entirely a monster. He was a deeply flawed, self-serving man who, in the midst of his greatest crime, had tried to right one of his firm's past wrongs using my money to do it, of course. The complication was devastating. If I exposed the $500,000 fraud, the state attorney would demand the immediate return of all stolen funds. That would mean taking $150,000 away from a desperately ill child. My clean, sharp path to revenge had just hit an ugly, moral snag. I could ruin Mark completely, secure in my justice. But if I did, I would become the woman who destroyed a sick child's last hope. The final, agonizing question of my revenge wasn't about Mark or Lara. It was about Clara Davies and her grandson. Could I truly have my vengeance if it came at the cost of an innocent life? And how could Mark's single, secret act of hidden kindness possibly undo my entire strategy? I spent a sleepless night staring at the data Elijah sent: Clara Davies, the sick grandson, the $150,000 that kept them afloat. I realized that true justice wasn't about simply destroying Mark. It was about protecting what was innocent and untainted. If I secured my revenge by ruining the life of a child, I would become the very monster I was fighting. My victory would forever taste like ash. I called Richard, my lawyer, and Andrew, my financial advisor. "We are amending the fraud petition immediately," I instructed. "We will drop the claim for the $150,000 paid to Clara Davies. We will frame it as legal indemnity from the marital estate against a past firm liability, effectively insulating that money from seizure. We focus entirely on the $350,000 used for the Port 95 fraud with Lara Vasquez." It was a strategic sacrifice. It meant less money recovered, a slightly weaker financial claim, and more cost to me. But it meant my hands were clean. I chose peace over profit. And in choosing the moral high ground, I ensured that when Mark finally faced justice, it would be purely for the consequences of his own malice, not my desperation. Richard argued against it, citing the lost recovery potential. But I was firm. We filed the amended petition, carefully excising the Clara Davies payment from the fraud charges. The legal maneuvering was complex, but it achieved the goal. The $150,000 was safe. This move sent an unexpected shockwave. Lara Vasquez, still fighting the delayed title insurance on the Port 95 deal, saw the amended petition. She realized I was playing a different game. She saw I was surgically targeting only the criminal financial actions linked to her scheme. Her frantic efforts to contact Mark spiked. She knew I was closing in, and she knew that if Mark cracked under the renewed pressure of the focused fraud charges, he would expose the last, hidden secret that connected the entire scheme. The pressure was mounting on Mark. His last remaining ally Lara was now convinced he was about to sell her out to save himself. While the lawyers fought over the fraud claims, Elijah was still working on Mark's burner phone records. He was looking for one final, crucial piece of communication that Mark had tried hardest to bury. The $25,000 demand at 2 a.m. was the trigger for everything. I knew he needed the money for Lara, but I never knew the specifics of the threat. Elijah found it. A transcript of a frantic voice note Mark had accidentally saved to a temporary cloud folder, sent to his financial advisor the night before he called me. Mark's voice was hoarse, terrified. "They found it. The funds are short. I need $25,000 wired, non-traceable, to Lara now. If the authorities find the shortfall on the Bayside title account tomorrow morning, it's not just disbarment, it's federal fraud. Lara is the only one who can cover it with her trust. If she doesn't get the cash, she's going to them." Bayside title account. That was the escrow account Mark managed for a major corporate client. The $25,000 wasn't just a hush payment. It was Mark illegally borrowing from a client's escrow fund to pay for his scheme, hoping to replace the money before the morning audit. He hadn't just committed financial fraud against me. He had committed a massive federal crime against his client, one that involved misappropriation of fiduciary funds. Lara hadn't demanded $25,000 to keep the affair quiet. She demanded it to cover the hole in the client escrow account he created during their property scam. If the shortfall was discovered, Mark was finished. He called me because he was already facing criminal arrest. I realized then why the police had called me that night, a few hours after Mark's initial desperate demand. I had forgotten about that part. overshadowed by the discovery of the $25,000 transfer. I looked at the notes from the initial police call, buried deep in my phone log. The officer hadn't called about Mark being in New York. The officer called because Mark's firm, already suspicious of his behavior, had found the initial shortfall in the Bayside title escrow account that morning. The officer's clipped message was, "Mrs. Hamilton, we have a warrant for Mark Hamilton's arrest regarding the Bayside title escrow. He is considered a flight risk. We need to know his current location immediately." I had transferred the money for him. I had covered his crime. And then, when the police called, seeking his location for arrest, I had simply said, "He's on a business trip in New York. I don't know the exact hotel." I hadn't just filed for divorce. I had unknowingly lied to federal authorities, giving my husband the window he needed to escape immediate arrest. And now, the police call that first shattered my peace was about to return, demanding an answer for his final, desperate mistake. The Bayside title escrow shortfall. That was the core crime. It wasn't divorce. It wasn't just civil fraud. It was embezzlement of client funds, a federal felony. I had initially transferred $25,000 to cover his crime, and when the police called, I had lied to protect him. That loyalty was dead. Killed by his greed, his arrogance, and the $500,000 he stole. I called Richard, my lawyer, and skipped the small talk. "Richard, stop the civil proceedings for a moment. We need to immediately contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the State Attorney General's Specialized Fraud Unit. This is no longer a civil matter. It involves misappropriation of funds from a title escrow account, federal jurisdiction." Richard was stunned by the escalation but followed my lead. We packaged the final, irrefutable evidence: the voice memo about the shortfall, the wire transfer to Lara's holding company, and the proof of the $500,000 scheme, all proving motive for the embezzlement. This was the final nail. The Bar Association would disbar him. The civil court would strip his assets, but the federal government would strip his freedom. I was no longer seeking justice for my heart. I was seeking justice for the law he shattered. My final act of retribution was facing the consequence of my own, brief deception. I called the Miami Police Department, asking for the detective who had initially called about Mark's location. "Detective," I said, my voice measured and steady. "I need to correct a statement I made regarding my husband Mark Hamilton, on the night of the Bayside escrow audit. I told you he was on a business trip in New York. That was inaccurate. I was heavily distressed and trying to protect my marriage. I now know he had intentionally misappropriated funds. And I was unknowingly attempting to cover his crime by transferring money to his co-conspirator. I provided him an alibi to evade arrest. I didn't try to minimize my actions. I confessed the lie and then provided the evidence that confirmed Mark's current, traceable location, a low-end rental he had secretly acquired in a desperate attempt to hide after his eviction. By admitting my own small lie, I cleared my conscience, eliminated any future criminal liability for obstruction, and ensured the full force of the law was now pursuing Mark, armed with his exact coordinates. The woman who lied for him was now the one delivering him to the law. The federal authorities moved swiftly and silently. There were no dramatic confrontations, just cold, bureaucratic efficiency. Mark was arrested late that afternoon at his cheap rental. He was formally charged with wire fraud, misappropriation of client funds, and several counts of corporate embezzlement. Bail was set impossibly high, given his flight risk and the destruction of his assets. He didn't call me. He called his mother. The man who had chased status and wealth was now calling home for comfort he had long rejected. My divorce was now a formality. The courts, presented with the federal criminal charges, immediately dissolved the restraining order on my contingency fund. The judge cited the overwhelming evidence of fraudulent intent on Mark's part. The Aspen money was mine. My liquidity was restored. Justice was not just served, it was funded. But the justice wasn't complete until Lara Vasquez faced consequences. The FBI's investigation into Mark's Port 95 scheme quickly tied her holding company to the fraud. The title insurance firm, already spooked by my anonymous tip, dropped the deal entirely, citing unacceptable liability risk. Lara's entire leveraged empire, the vengeance-fueled property acquisition, collapsed. She hadn't just lost the deal, she was now facing civil liability from the investors she had failed, and potential criminal scrutiny for her role in Mark's embezzlement scheme. Her long-game revenge had detonated in her own hands. I had successfully ruined the marriage, exposed the financial fraud, protected the innocent, and ensured Mark faced federal prison time. The fight was over. But what happens after the war? With the house sold, the betrayer jailed, and the mistress ruined, where do you find peace when the person you used to be is gone forever? The silence was different now. It was no longer the oppressive silence of an empty marriage but the quiet of a controlled demolition. The Venetian Islands house sold quickly. A cash offer, closed within a month. I watched the movers pack the last boxes. Not ours, but mine. Mark's few possessions had been shipped to a storage unit, paid for with the last of his undisputed savings. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The study where the 2 a.m. call came in. The kitchen where I planned his downfall. I expected satisfaction. I felt nothing. Just exhaustion. The divorce was finalized weeks later, quickly and without contest. Mark, facing federal charges, signed every document to secure the cooperation agreement his public defender had brokered. I received the house equity, clear title to all my assets, and full restitution for the stolen $350,000. The $150,000 for Clara Davies remained outside the claim, safe. The retribution was complete. Legally, financially, and professionally, Mark Hamilton was extinguished. His actions now belonged to the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I had won every battle. I moved into a quiet, smaller condo miles away from the water and the wealth that had blinded us. It was here, surrounded by my own books and art, that the true cost of the war became clear. I had become so cold, so clinical. The rage that fueled me was gone, replaced by a permanent, analytical detachment. The woman who could orchestrate a federal investigation against her own husband was not the same woman who had dreamt of a simple life 5 years ago. I found an old photograph, Mark and me, smiling, young, standing in front of the rundown first apartment we bought. Before the greed, before the arrogance, before Lara. He wasn't entirely a monster then. He was just a man with too much ambition and too little character. My heart wasn't broken anymore. It was hardened. I realized that Mark's betrayal hadn't just taken my money. It had forced me to sacrifice a part of my own humanity to survive the attack. Vengeance isn't just taking something from your enemy. It's giving away something of yourself. The win felt less like a triumph and more like a necessary amputation. I was safe, I was solvent, but I was also profoundly alone. Elijah became more than just a consultant, he became a friend. He confirmed that the Port 95 deal had completely collapsed, and Lara Vasquez, stripped of her network and credibility, had left Miami. Her vengeance had achieved nothing but her own ruin. "You won, Sarah," Elijah said during a final call. "You took him down cleanly, legally, and you ended the criminal liability for the firm. They owe you. They owe the truth." I corrected him. I owed myself the truth. I asked him to take the substantial fee I still owed him and instead use it to establish a small, private legal trust. Its mission: quietly funding legal counsel for people like Clara Davies, those crushed by corporate arrogance and malpractice, whom lawyers like Mark had once defeated. I wasn't going to be defined by the years I wasted on a liar. I was going to be defined by the quiet surgical acts of justice I performed in the future. I was going to use the power Mark taught me to wield, but for the right reasons. The only true peace I felt was tied to the $150,000. I had called Clara Davies' lawyer anonymously, confirming the funds were secure and legally untouchable. I knew her grandson's treatment was continuing. Mark, the thief and the liar, had inadvertently ensured that one piece of stolen money resulted in genuine, life-saving good. It was the ultimate irony. My cold, calculated vengeance secured his downfall, but his one act of reckless, illegal empathy saved a life. It was a testament to the complex, messy truth that people are never purely good or purely evil. If my cold justice secured the legal outcome, and Mark's hidden guilt secured the moral outcome, then who, truly, had been the victim? And what single, final piece of advice could I give to someone who finds themselves staring into the same abyss of betrayal? I stood on the curb for the last time. Not watching Mark leave, but watching the new owner's car pull up to the Venetian Islands house. The window Mark had smashed had been replaced. The lawn was perfect. It was someone else's gilded cage now. I got into my own car, a sensible, non-flashy sedan, and drove away. I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving the woman who lived there. The woman who sought validation in luxury and permanence in a fragile marriage. I realized that Mark had stolen from me long before the $500,000. He stole my belief in the simplicity of shared purpose. He stole the comfort of safety. But in taking those things, he forced me to discover something far more valuable: my own capacity for ruthlessness, tempered by my final moral choice to protect the innocent. The revenge wasn't the goal. The recovery of my own self-worth was the goal. And that recovery wasn't measured in dollars but in the distance I put between the past and my future. Weeks later, Elijah sent me one last update. Mark had pleaded guilty to the federal charges. He was facing a substantial prison sentence. Laura Vasquez had fled the country to avoid civil lawsuits. But Elijah shared one final, chilling detail from Mark's recorded phone calls before his arrest. Mark, in a fit of despair, confessed his single greatest fear to his lawyer. "I don't care about the money. The money is Sarah's. The worst thing she did was make me realize I'm expendable. She didn't need me to win. She never needed me at all." That was it, the true, final victory. Mark's ultimate fear wasn't jail or poverty. It was the realization that the woman he dismissed as a supportive wife was, in fact, the dominant force in their partnership. My power wasn't the vengeance I enacted. It was the self-sufficiency I had cultivated all along. He thought he ruined me by leaving. I ruined him by proving I was better off alone. My betrayal wasn't my weakness. It became my unleashed strength. So, what is the lesson I learned? Betrayal is a fire. You can let it consume you, leaving nothing but ash and bitterness. Or, you can use it as a forge. Let the pain reshape you into something harder, sharper, and more resilient than you were before. Don't seek revenge for the past. Seek justice for your future. Invest in your own independence, your own knowledge, your own exit strategy. Because when the mask finally drops, and the lies are exposed, the only person who can save you is the one you stopped relying on your partner for: yourself. I lost a husband, a home, and $500,000. But I gained the unshakable certainty that I am the final architect of my own life. And that is a price you can never, ever put a dollar amount on. The end of this story isn't the verdict. It's the new beginning. I'm moving forward, building something stronger, something real. And I want you to remember the moment at 2:03 a.m. when the phone rang and my life shattered. You lived through that panic with me. You have stayed with me for 4 long hours, through every betrayal, every twist, and every moment of agonizing strategic planning. You watched me secure my justice. So I'm asking you, as a final transaction, if you've invested this much time in my recovery, are you truly going to walk away now without hitting subscribe? Don't let my pain be in vain. And if, for some reason, you're still on the fence, then I want you to go to the comments right now. Tell me why you won't subscribe. Is it fear? Doubt? Are you worried that Mark's karma might catch up to you next? I'm watching. I'm waiting. And I promise, my next story of betrayal and triumph will be even longer. And remember, always know where the escape funds are.